Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell had always prided herself on maintaining professional composure, even when the universe seemed determined to test her limits. 8 months aboard the deep space research vessel Prometheus had taught her that space exploration was 90% routine monitoring and 10% absolute terror, with very little middle ground between the two states. Currently, she was experiencing the routine monitoring part, which meant staring at communication arrays that hadn't received anything more exciting than background cosmic radiation in weeks. Her station on the bridge hummed quietly, displaying the same "No incoming transmissions" message that had mocked her for the past 3 days. "Anything interesting from the void today, Mitchell?" asked Captain Torres, making her rounds with the casual authority of someone who'd spent more years in space than most people spent planetside. "Just the usual cosmic loneliness, Captain," Sarah replied, tapping her display to refresh the readings for the 14th time in the last hour. "Though I did pick up what might have been a pulsar heartbeat from the Kepler sector. Either that, or the universe is developing arrhythmia." Captain Torres chuckled, a sound that managed to be both warm and tired. "Keep monitoring. Command wants us ready for anything unusual before we begin the return journey." Sarah nodded, though the mention of returning to Earth sent an uncomfortable twist through her stomach. After 8 months of deep space exploration beyond the Helix Nebula, the Prometheus had been ordered home to report their findings to the Colonial Defense Authority. It should have been good news, returning to real gravity, actual weather, and food that didn't come in vacuum-sealed packets marked with expiration dates from the previous decade. The problem was Dr. Kai Reeves. Sarah glanced across the bridge to where Kai sat at the xenolinguistic station, her dark hair falling in waves around shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken thoughts. Even from this distance, Sarah could see the distinctive pointed ears that marked Kai as someone from the outer colony worlds, where generations of genetic adaptation had produced subtle but noticeable evolutionary changes. Dr. Reeves had joined the mission as their specialist in alien communication protocols, though 8 months of deep space had produced exactly 0 alien communications to analyze. Instead, Kai spent her shifts creating theoretical frameworks for first contact scenarios, building translation matrices for languages that might not exist, and maintaining the kind of professional distance that made Sarah wonder if she'd imagined the brief moments when their eyes had met across crowded briefing rooms. Dar. "Reeves," Captain Torres continued her rounds, "any progress on those theoretical contact protocols?" Kai looked up from her console, her amber eyes, another colony world adaptation, meeting the captain's gaze with the same careful neutrality she showed everyone. "I've completed preliminary frameworks for 17 different communication paradigms, including quantum entangled thought transmission and mathematical concept sharing through gravitational wave manipulation." "Impressive," Captain Torres said. "Though let's hope we don't encounter anything that requires gravitational wave conversations before we get home." "Indeed," Kai replied, already turning back to her work with the dismissive efficiency Sarah had learned to recognize as Kai's default response to any attempt at casual interaction. Sarah tried to focus on her own console, but found herself stealing glances at the xenolinguist's profile. Kai worked with the intensity of someone solving puzzles that existed only in her own mind, her long fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed probability matrices for alien language structures. There was something almost musical about the way she worked, a rhythm that suggested she was hearing patterns others missed. "Mitchell," came a voice from behind her, and Sarah turned to find Lieutenant Park holding a data pad and wearing the expression of someone about to deliver news that would complicate everyone's day. "We've got updated orders from command." Sarah accepted the pad, scanning the official text with growing unease. "They're moving up our departure timeline," she said, loud enough for the relevant bridge crew to hear. "Apparently, long-range sensors have detected some kind of gravitational anomaly moving in our direction. Command wants us back in Earth space before whatever it is arrives in this sector." Captain Torres appeared at Sarah's shoulder. "How long do we have?" 72 hours to complete current operations and begin burn for the return journey," Sarah read. "All personnel should prepare for extended cryosleep protocol during the 18-month return trip." The bridge fell into the kind of quiet that accompanied news of major mission changes. Sarah found herself looking at Kai again, wondering what 18 months in cryosleep would mean for whatever connection had been building between them through months of careful glances and professional conversations that lasted just a few seconds longer than strictly necessary. Kai's reaction was harder to read than usual, her expression neutral as she processed the information. But Sarah caught something in the tilt of her head, a subtle tension in her shoulders that suggested the news had affected her more than she was letting on. "Dr. Reeves," Captain Torres called, "I'll need your assessment of whether this timeline interferes with any of your ongoing research." Kai stood with the fluid grace that characterized all her movements, gathering a data pad before approaching the captain's position. As she passed Sarah's station, their eyes met for just a moment, long enough for Sarah to catch something that might have been regret, or relief, or both. "My research can be completed within the current timeline," Kai said to the captain, her voice carrying the same professional tone she used for everything. "Though I should note that any first contact scenarios become significantly less likely once we've departed this sector." "Understood," Captain Torres replied. "Begin preparations for data archival and equipment shutdown. I want all departments ready for departure in 60 hours. As the bridge crew began implementing departure protocols, Sarah found herself stealing one more glance at Kai, who had returned to her station and was already beginning the process of backing up months of theoretical work. There was something final about the way she moved, as if she was not just preparing for departure but for some kind of ending Sarah didn't fully understand. The thought occurred to her that 18 months in cryosleep would essentially reset whatever had been developing between them. By the time they reached Earth, they'd be different people returning to different lives, and the careful tension that had sustained Sarah through months of deep space routine would be nothing more than a memory of something that had never quite happened. Sarah turned back to her console, watching the steady stream of routine data that would soon become someone else's responsibility. 72 hours until departure, 18 months until Earth, and a growing certainty that she was about to lose something she'd never actually had the courage to reach for. The universe, she reflected, had a peculiar sense of timing. Sarah discovered the truth about Dr. Reeves' departure plans in the most mundane way possible, by accidentally accessing the wrong personnel file while updating departure manifests. The data scrolled across her screen in neat, bureaucratic rows that somehow managed to make a suicide mission sound like a routine assignment transfer. "Special Communication Initiative, Deep Space Liaison Assignment," she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Duration, indefinite. Personnel, Dr. K. Reeves, Xenolinguistics. Mission classification, volunteer only." The file contained details that made her stomach drop toward her boots. Dr. Reeves had volunteered to remain behind on a solo monitoring station, tasked with establishing communication protocols if the approaching gravitational anomaly turned out to be of artificial origin. The mission parameters were deliberately vague, but the subtext was clear: someone needed to stay behind to make first contact, and that someone would be doing it alone. "Son of a neutron star," Sarah muttered, borrowing one of the engineering crew's favorite expressions. She'd always known Kai was dedicated to her work, but volunteering for what amounted to exile in deep space suggested levels of commitment that bordered on self-destructive. She scrolled through more details, her training in communication protocols helping her decode the military euphemisms. That a special neural interface equipment mentioned in the supply list was clearly experimental technology, the kind that came with warnings about permanent psychological effects and irreversible brain chemistry alterations. "Mitchell?" Lieutenant Park appeared at her shoulder again, this time carrying what appeared to be actual coffee instead of the brown liquid the food processors claimed was coffee. "You look like someone just told you the replicators are serving mystery meat again." "Worse," Sarah said, gesturing at her screen. "Apparently, we're leaving Dr. Reeves behind to play cosmic pen pal with whatever's heading our way." Park leaned closer to read the file, his expression shifting from curious to concerned. "Neural interface technology for alien communication? That's some serious experimental stuff. The kind that tends to leave volunteers significantly less human than when they started." "Exactly." Sarah closed the file, but the information had already burned itself into her memory. And she volunteered for it. Dr. Reeves has always been Park paused, searching for diplomatic phrasing. Intensely focused on her work. Maybe she sees this as the ultimate research opportunity. Sarah wanted to argue, but she couldn't entirely dismiss the theory. In 8 months of observation, she'd watched Kai approach every theoretical problem with the kind of passion most people reserve for hobbies or relationships. The woman who could spend 16 hours straight building translation matrices for hypothetical alien languages might indeed see direct neural communication with extraterrestrial intelligence as the opportunity of several lifetimes. When does she transfer to the monitoring station? Sarah asked, dreading the answer. According to this, her transport launches in 18 hours. Just enough time to get her established before we begin our burn for Earth. Park's voice carried the sympathy of someone who'd recognized Sarah's interest in the enigmatic xenolinguist, despite her attempts at professional discretion. 18 hours. Sarah stared at her console, watching routine data stream past while her mind raced through calculations that had nothing to do with communication protocols. 18 hours to figure out how to have a conversation she'd been avoiding for 8 months, or accept that she'd spend the next 18 months wondering what might have happened if she'd found the courage to try. I should get back to departure prep, Park said diplomatically, recognizing the look of someone who needed time to process unexpected information. Let me know if you need anything. Sarah nodded absently, already lost in thought. The bridge continued its routine operations around her, but everything felt different now that she knew Kai would soon be gone, not just for the return journey, but potentially forever. She tried to focus on her duties, updating communication logs and preparing data archives for the journey home. But her attention kept drifting to Kai's station, where the xenolinguist worked with her usual intense concentration, apparently unaffected by the knowledge that she'd volunteered to sacrifice her humanity for the sake of scientific advancement. During the shift change, Sarah found herself walking past Kai's station more slowly than necessary, hoping for some kind of opening for conversation. But Kai maintained her professional focus, acknowledging Sarah's presence with nothing more than a brief nod before returning to her work. Dr. Reeves, Sarah said finally, abandoning subtlety in favor of direct approach. I heard about your transfer to the monitoring station. Kai's hands paused over her console for just a moment before resuming their precise movements. Information travels quickly on a ship this size. It's a dangerous assignment, Sarah continued, trying to keep her voice neutral despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. Neural interface technology isn't exactly known for its safety record. All worthwhile research involves risk, Kai replied, her tone carrying the same professional distance she maintained with everyone. Besides, the opportunity to establish direct communication with a potentially advanced alien species outweighs the personal considerations. Sarah wanted to ask about those personal considerations, wanted to know if Kai had anyone who would miss her during what might be years of isolation in deep space. But the question felt too intimate for their carefully maintained professional relationship. The neural interface equipment, Sarah said instead, I've read the technical specifications. It's designed to integrate alien thought patterns directly into human consciousness. The psychological effects could be permanent. For the first time, Kai looked up from her console, her amber eyes meeting Sarah's with an intensity that made her breath catch. Are you concerned about my psychological well-being, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell? The question carried layers Sarah couldn't entirely decode, but she caught the hint of something personal beneath Kai's professional facade. I'm concerned about a valued colleague taking unnecessary risks. Valued colleague, Kai repeated, and Sarah caught what might have been disappointment in her voice. Of course. The conversation died there, killed by the weight of things neither of them seemed willing to say directly. Sarah returned to her own station, frustrated by her inability to break through Kai's emotional barriers even when facing the possibility of permanent separation. The rest of the shift passed intense routine, both women maintaining their professional duties while navigating around the conversation they'd almost had. As Sarah prepared to leave the bridge, she caught Kai watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something that might have been regret, or longing, or simple scientific curiosity about human emotional responses. 17 hours until Kai's departure, and Sarah was no closer to understanding why the thought of losing her felt like losing something she'd never actually possessed. The gravitational anomaly arrived 6 hours ahead of schedule, which Sarah reflected was typical of the universe's tendency to ignore human planning. Emergency alarms echoed through the Prometheus as Captain Torres called all senior staff to the bridge, where the main display showed sensor readings that shouldn't have been possible according to known physics. "It's not a natural phenomenon," reported Lieutenant Kim from the science station, her voice tight with the kind of controlled panic that came from discovering the universe was stranger than expected. "The gravitational signatures suggest a massive artificial construct, possibly multiple vessels operating in some kind of formation." Sarah's communication console erupted with activity as deep space monitoring stations throughout the sector began transmitting emergency data. But underneath the chaos of routine emergency protocols, she detected something else, patterns in the background radiation that seemed almost intentional. "Captain," she called, "I'm picking up what might be structured signals embedded in the gravitational waves. It's like someone's trying to communicate through the distortion itself." Before Captain Torres could respond, Dr. Reeves was at Sarah's station, her amber eyes bright with the intensity of someone recognizing the culmination of months of theoretical work. "May I?" she asked, already reaching for the communication controls. Sarah nodded, watching as Kai's fingers flew across the holographic interface with practiced precision. The xenolinguist's pointed ears twitched slightly as she concentrated, a detail Sarah had noticed during previous moments of intense focus. "These aren't random gravitational fluctuations," Kai said, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and concern. "They're following mathematical progressions, prime numbers, geometric sequences, universal constants. Someone is definitely trying to communicate." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of instruments and the occasional chirp of incoming data. Sarah found herself watching Kai work with growing fascination, noting how the other woman seemed to hear patterns in the cosmic noise that everyone else missed. "I need access to the experimental neural interface equipment," Kai said suddenly, turning to Captain Torres. "If these beings are communicating through gravitational manipulation, direct neural contact might be our only option for establishing meaningful dialogue." "Absolutely not," Captain Torres replied firmly. "We don't even know if these signals are coming from hostile forces. I'm not authorizing experimental brain surgery based on mathematical patterns in spacetime distortion." "Captain," Kai's voice carried quiet urgency, "if these entities can manipulate gravity for communication, they're operating on a technological level far beyond anything in human space. Whether they're hostile or not, ignoring them isn't really an option." Sarah watched the exchange with growing unease. She'd read the technical specifications for the neural interface equipment, knew the risks involved in direct alien mental contact. But she could also see the determination in Kai's expression, the look of someone who'd found the research opportunity she'd been preparing for her entire career. "Dr. Reeves," Sarah said carefully, "what exactly would neural interface contact involve?" Kai turned to her, and for a moment, her professional mask slipped enough to reveal something that might have been vulnerability. "Direct quantum entanglement between human consciousness and alien thought patterns. It would allow real-time translation of concepts that don't exist in human language, but the neurological integration would be permanent," Sarah finished. "You'd never be entirely human again." "I'd be something more than human," Kai corrected. "Someone capable of bridging the gap between species, of facilitating understanding across evolutionary boundaries that might be impossible to cross otherwise." The bridge shuddered as another gravitational wave passed through the ship's structure. On the main display, the sensor readings showed the approaching entities growing larger and more complex, their formation suggesting intelligence and purpose. "Dr. Reeves," Captain Torres said, "I appreciate your dedication to first contact protocols, but I cannot authorize." "Captain," Sarah interrupted, surprised by the sound of her own voice. "What if she's right? What if this is exactly the kind of situation the neural interface technology was designed for?" Everyone on the bridge turned to look at her, and Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. But the thought of Kai undergoing irreversible mental transformation alone, without anyone who cared about her well-being to monitor the process, was worse than the embarrassment of speaking up. The experimental equipment includes safety protocols, Sarah continued, accessing the technical files on her console. Monitoring systems, neural pattern backup procedures, emergency disconnection capabilities. If Dr. Reeves is determined to attempt contact, we should at least ensure she has proper support. Kai's amber eyes widened slightly, and Sarah caught something in her expression that looked like gratitude mixed with surprise. You've studied the neural interface specifications? I've studied a lot of things, Sarah replied, meeting Kai's gaze directly for the first time in months of careful professional distance. Including the psychological support protocols for personnel undergoing experimental consciousness modification. The admission hung in the air between them, carrying implications that Sarah hadn't intended to reveal but couldn't take back. She'd spent weeks reading technical manuals about neural interface technology, not because her duties required it but because someone she cared about was volunteering for a procedure that could fundamentally change who she was. Captain Torres looked between them with the expression of someone recognizing relationship dynamics she'd been pretending not to notice. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, are you volunteering to serve as psychological support for Dr. Reeves during the neural interface procedure? Sarah's training warred with her emotions, military protocol battling against the growing certainty that she couldn't let Kai face this transformation alone. If Dr. Reeves believes the procedure is necessary for establishing communication, then yes, Captain. I volunteer to provide support. The neural interface process requires constant monitoring, Kai said quietly. Psychological support personnel would need to maintain physical contact with the subject to ensure consciousness stability during alien integration. It's an 18-hour minimum commitment. 18 hours of direct physical contact with Kai while her consciousness merged with alien intelligence. Sarah's heart rate increased noticeably, but she kept her voice steady. I understand the requirements, Dr. Reeves. The gravitational waves intensified, and new patterns emerged in the sensor readings, complex geometric formations that suggested the approaching entities were organizing themselves for some kind of systematic contact attempt. We're running out of time, Kai said, her attention returning to the communication console. If we're going to attempt neural interface communication, we need to begin preparations immediately. Captain Torres studied the sensor readings, then looked at her communication officer and xenolinguist with the expression of someone making a decision that would either save everyone or doom them all. Very well. Dr. Reeves, prepare the neural interface equipment. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, review the support protocols. But if anything goes wrong, anything at all, we terminate the procedure immediately. Sarah nodded, already calling up the technical specifications she'd memorized weeks ago. As the bridge crew began emergency preparations for humanity's first attempt at direct neural communication with an alien species, she found herself wondering if she was volunteering for scientific history or emotional catastrophe. Possibly both. The transport shuttle's departure alarm echoed through the docking bay with mechanical indifference, counting down the final moments before Dr. Kai Reeves would transfer to the Deep Space Monitoring Station. Sarah stood near the airlock, watching Kai make final equipment checks with the methodical precision of someone who'd accepted an irreversible decision. 18 hours of neural interface contact had changed both of them in ways Sarah was still trying to understand. The alien consciousness they'd encountered, beings calling themselves the Wanderers, had shared memories and emotions through quantum entanglement that left human language feeling inadequate for describing the experience. Kai's mind now carried fragments of cosmic perspective that spanned millennia, while Sarah had glimpsed the terrible loneliness of a species fleeing the death of their entire galactic cluster. The monitoring station's neural interface array is more sophisticated than our experimental equipment, Kai said, adjusting the settings on a portable consciousness stabilizer with the casual expertise of someone who'd become intimately familiar with the technology. I should be able to maintain contact with the Wanderer fleet and coordinate their integration into this galactic region. Sarah nodded, though her attention was focused more on Kai's face than her words. The neural integration had left subtle changes, a depth in her amber eyes that suggested she was seeing multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, and occasional pauses in conversation as if she was listening to voices only she could hear. Integration, Sarah repeated. You make it sound like they're planning to stay. Their home galaxy is being consumed by entropy cascade, a chain reaction that converts matter directly into void space, Kai explained, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before the neural contact. They're not invaders, Sarah. They're refugees looking for a place to exist without causing harm to established civilizations. The use of her first name sent an unexpected jolt through Sarah's chest. After months of careful professional distance, Kai's casual intimacy felt like stepping into unfamiliar gravity. And you're volunteering to spend the rest of your life facilitating that integration, Sarah said, trying to keep accusation out of her voice. Kai's hand stilled on her equipment. The neural interface creates permanent quantum entanglement with Wanderer consciousness. Maintaining the communication bridge requires constant mental connection. I can't simply turn it off and return to normal human existence. So you're choosing them over, Sarah stopped herself before completing the thought, but Kai's enhanced perceptive abilities caught the implication. Over what, Sarah? Kai turned to face her directly, and Sarah found herself looking into eyes that held starlight from distant galaxies. Over a career in xenolinguistics? Over returning to Earth to write research papers about theoretical alien contact? The transport shuttle's engines hummed to life, adding urgency to a conversation Sarah realized she'd been avoiding for 8 months. In 10 minutes, Kai would board the shuttle, transfer to the monitoring station, and begin a new existence as humanity's permanent liaison to an alien species whose thoughts would become part of her own consciousness. Overstaying, Sarah said finally, the words coming out more vulnerable than she'd intended. Over finding out what might happen between us if you weren't so determined to sacrifice yourself for science. Kai's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for Sarah to track, finally settling on something that might have been regret. Sarah, 8 months, Sarah interrupted, moving closer despite the risk of making her feelings too obvious. 8 months of professional conversations and careful distance and pretending we don't watch each other when we think the other isn't looking. And now you're leaving to become something that isn't entirely human anymore. The neural integration doesn't make me less human, Kai said quietly. It makes me more than human. Capable of understanding perspectives that span cosmic timescales, of facilitating communication between species that evolved under different stars. But still you, Sarah said, reaching out to touch Kai's hand before she could reconsider the gesture. Still the woman who builds translation matrices for languages that don't exist and finds mathematical poetry in gravitational wave patterns. The contact sent a shock through both of them, not the electric sensation of neural interface technology, but something entirely human and far more dangerous to their carefully maintained emotional barriers. Sarah, Kai said, her voice carrying warning and longing in equal measure. The transport shuttle's departure countdown reached the 2-minute mark, automated systems announcing final boarding call with mechanical urgency. Around them, the docking bay bustled with departure preparations, but Sarah felt as if she and Kai existed in a bubble of suspended time. Can I ask you something before I go? Kai said suddenly, her voice softening in a way Sarah had never heard before. Sarah's heart completely froze. She'd known this moment was coming, had felt it building through months of unspoken tension and careful professional distance. But hearing the question she'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure still hit her like decompression exposure. Yes, she whispered, not trusting her voice to carry more than a single syllable. Kai's amber eyes, now holding depths that reflected alien stars' capes, met hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. If I asked you to come with me, to volunteer for neural integration so we could share this transformation together, would you? The question hung between them like an unexploded quantum bomb, carrying implications that would reshape everything Sarah understood about her future. Joining the Neural Interface Project would mean abandoning her military career, accepting permanent alteration of her consciousness, and committing to a life spent bridging the gap between human and alien understanding. It would also mean staying with Kai. The monitoring station is equipped for 2 neural interface subjects, Kai continued, her words tumbling out with uncharacteristic urgency. The Wanderers prefer paired consciousness bridging, they think in collective patterns that are easier to translate through multiple human perspectives. I'd planned to manage alone, but if you were willing. Sarah looked at Kai's face, seeing past the enhanced perceptions and alien knowledge to the woman who'd spent 8 months maintaining careful distance because she'd been planning to leave all along. The woman who'd built emotional barriers not from disinterest but from the knowledge that she'd volunteered for a transformation that would take her beyond normal human connection. "You're asking if I'd give up everything to become something more than human with you," Sarah said, testing the reality of the proposition. "I'm asking if you choose the unknown with me over the safe path alone," Kai replied. "I'm asking if 8 months of professional distance was as difficult for you as it was for me. I'm asking if you'd rather spend the next 50 years wondering what might have happened than find out together." The transport shuttle's engines reached full power, departure imminent whether they'd resolved anything or not. Sarah thought about returning to Earth, resuming her military career, spending the rest of her life knowing she'd had the chance to explore the universe with someone she loved and chosen safety instead. "The neural integration," Sarah said, "what would it be like? Sharing consciousness with you and the Wanderers?" "Like learning to think in colors that don't have names," Kai said, her voice carrying echoes of cosmic perspective. "Like discovering that consciousness is bigger and stranger and more beautiful than anything human psychology ever imagined. Like never being alone with your thoughts again, because you'd be part of something infinite." Sarah looked around the docking bay, at the routine preparations for a routine departure that would take her back to a routine life. Then she looked at Kai, whose enhanced eyes reflected possibilities that existed beyond the edges of human experience. "Kai," she said, making a decision that felt like stepping off the edge of known space, "I need to grab my personal effects and submit a transfer request to Captain Torres." "Are you certain?" Kai asked, though her expression suggested she was afraid to hope. 8 months of certainty that I was falling in love with someone who was planning to leave," Sarah replied, surprised by her own courage in finally speaking the truth. "I'm not making that mistake twice." The transport shuttle's departure alarm sounded its final warning, but neither woman moved toward the airlock. Instead, they stood in the docking bay, hands still touching, planning a future that would take them beyond the boundaries of human experience but together into the infinite strange beauty of the cosmos. "Besides," Sarah added, smiling at the woman whose consciousness would soon intertwine with her own across quantum dimensions, "someone needs to make sure you don't get too absorbed in alien philosophy to remember basic human needs like food and sleep." Kai laughed, the sound carrying harmonics from distant stars, and Sarah knew she'd made the right choice.